It was called the grandest city in Texas at the dawn of the 20th century, Galveston. With the largest port, the biggest mansions, the most millionaires, and some of the first telephones and electric lights in Texas. Galveston in 1900 was prosperous due to its natural deep water port, transforming the city into a bustling center of commerce and making it one of the richest cities in the United States relative to its population. But in late August 1900, 4,000 miles away from the bustle of Galveston, a weather disturbance near the Cape Verde Islands west of Africa would intensify. As the storm moved west, it would grow into a hurricane, and its target was Galveston. By September 2, 1900, the hurricane had finally arrived in Cuba after a 3,000-mile journey from the Cape Verde Islands. Cuba was under U.S. military occupation then and maintained a highly respected weather bureau that kept in touch by telegraph with forecasters in Washington. As the hurricane struck their island, the Cubans sent urgent messages to Washington to warn that the storm likely would enter the Gulf of Mexico and threaten the entire U.S. Gulf Coast. But their messages were ignored.
The director of the U.S. Weather Bureau in Washington, D.C., a man named Willis Moore, he was a Machiavellian megalomaniac, jealous of the Cuban hurricane trackers. Willis Moore was convinced it was going to go up the northeastern seaboard. He was convinced with whatever black magic he used to divine things. When he decided to cut off all telegraphic communication between Cuba and the United States, which just accidentally happened about a week before the storm started forming in the Sahara Desert. When that happened and all that flow of information stopped, Galveston was doomed.
The hurricane continued to strengthen significantly while heading west-northwestward across the Gulf. By September 8, 1900, the storm was bearing down on Galveston. Local Weather Bureau Chief Isaac Klein was aware of the changing weather, but was forbidden by his boss in Washington from mentioning the word hurricane or issuing a warning.
Isaac Klein couldn't even use the words hurricane, tropical storm, or cyclone in any communiques between departments because of Willis Moore, because he thought it would scare the public.
Throughout the afternoon of September 8th, as skies darkened, the wind picked up and the tide rose.
Going up and going up and going up and going up, and higher and higher and higher and higher. I mean, by that time, it was game over.
Some of the most gripping eyewitness accounts of the storm and its aftermath are contained in a 125-year-old book called The Complete Story of the Galveston Horror. An unnamed artist drew pictures of the storm from interviews with eyewitnesses who offered vivid accounts of the tragedy as it unfolded.
I was in the Tremont Hotel during the storm. The building was thronged with refugees. Women were praying throughout the night, and above the roar of the wind could be heard the crash of buildings and the splash of the waves against the building. We expected the hotel to go down any minute. At daylight Sunday morning, I and 4 others started out to view the ruins. We passed 8 bodies within a block, and when we reached the beach, about 1 body per minute passed us, floating with the tide.
And it wasn't just the water that got them. The wind hit 145 miles an hour. The bodies were found nude from the force of the wind ripping the clothes off people.
The sights in the wrecked city of Galveston were the most horrible that I have ever witnessed. Dead bodies were everywhere. The sight was ghastly in the extreme, as the working parties would arrive at one of these holes and start to drag the bodies of the dead from the pools of dirty water.
For the first 2 days, the bodies were carried out to sea in steamers and dumped overboard. But now the officials are piling up the dead in heaps, with boards and pieces of timber among them. And after saturating the pile with oil, they set fire to them.
I heard the stories of women with long hair who had been caught in the trees with their hair and cut to pieces with slates that had been flying off the roofs of houses. It was a terrible time. It really was.
3,600 homes exploded in a matter of minutes. It looked like 1,000 lumber yards.
The inventor Thomas Edison sent a cameraman who arrived several days after the storm had struck. This remarkable record of the disaster is believed to be the first ever news film. The orphanage where 90 children and 10 nuns died while taking refuge in wooden structures nearby. The daily search for bodies beneath the rubble on Broadway Street. Workers attempting to move a schooner that had washed ashore during the hurricane.
It will be a long time before I will want to return to Galveston, or before I can forget the terrible scenes witnessed there. Since I left there, I have been seeing the dead bodies all day, lying stark and stiff, with looks of terror on their faces, as though they had realized that a sure death was before them. And at night I have dreamed of having to help handle them. I tell you, such things wear on a man, and I will bless the time when I can forget that I was ever in Galveston.
When they found my great-grandfather, he still had his wedding ring on, which I'm wearing right this minute. If you can see this on camera. He's 125 years old. This was his wedding ring. He went to work as a volunteer fireman in Palestine, Texas. So he would eventually, move to Galveston and start a family. And then, of course, he drowned in the Galveston Hurricane of 1900, trying to save another family after he had secured his own family on a somewhat higher point in the city.
With the arrival of the hurricane of 1900, Galveston would struggle to ever regain its former status. So devastating was the storm that it's estimated that nearly a fourth of the city's population died. The worst natural disaster in U.S. history, with a staggering death toll.
The level of death of 8,000 to 12,000 people did not have to occur to that degree. There was no way they were going to get out of not getting pounded badly, but it could have been lessened in the hundreds of people and maybe more. It's hard to say. But for the egomania and megalomania of the director of the U.S. Weather Bureau, Willis Moore.
Within a year after the mighty storm, it was clear that Galveston could not remain at the mercy of the Gulf. An entire city was raised as much as 17 feet above the Gulf of Mexico. 500 city blocks, 2,000 buildings, lifted using early 20th century engineering. First, the engineers devised a plan to build a massive seawall to protect the city from the high tides of hurricanes. And at the same time, what many thought to be impossible, delivering sand by barge from Galveston Bay into the heart of the city to raise the ground level. In some places raising the ground nearly 20 feet, homes were lifted up on wooden stilts awaiting the next pouring of the sand. For people who couldn't afford to have their homes raised, families moved to the second floor and let the sand bury their first floor. Even large buildings like St. Patrick's Church were lifted with hand-turned jack screws before the new ground was added below. The raising of Galveston between 1902 and 1911 is recognized as an engineering marvel. Today along the beach, two monuments pay tribute to the 1900 storm, one acknowledging the tragedy of all whose lives were lost in the hurricane, and another, a modest monument with a small piece of the seawall, a tribute to the countless lives that have been saved through brilliant engineering and through the hard work of the people of Galveston.
I do not believe that the dead and the victims were ever honored, nor was the event. It's always been given short shrift by the city of Galveston for 125 years. The victims and the families of the victims never were honored, nor was the event, and there is no excuse for it. And with my last breath, before I die, I'm going to be hammering them about this until somebody does the right thing.